Hello, everyone. My name is Cliff Corbett. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about writing today. Writing is something I love. It's something I've been doing for a very, very long time. I think about 4 years now. Probably longer, in fact, now that I think about it. Wow. But writing is something that means a whole lot to me. And with this multimedia presentation, what I want to do is give a very brief understanding of what writing means to me, and then I'm going to explain to you an aspect of writing that a lot of people have trouble with. A lot of people really struggle with this concept, and I want to help you figure it out, okay? It's real simple. How to create a character. And that seems real easy, right? I mean, you'd think, wow, that seems so simple. Just decide whether it's a boy or a girl, give him a name, give him some powers, and poof, instant character. You can throw him into a world. But guys, if it were that easy, anyone could write. The fact is, creating a character isn't easy. It can take a lot of work. Sometimes just coming up with the idea of the character is not the simplest part of doing it. Sometimes there's a lot that goes into making a character. There's just so much to it. And I'll give you a brief rundown on what it takes to create a character. First of all, the first thing you need to understand in creating a character is you need to understand the 5 basic elements of creating character. The first one is you need to understand that they've got to be well-rounded. A well-rounded character, follow me on this one. What's the biggest annoying thing you can have with a character? Is it that they're evil? No, because some evil characters are the most fun characters. Is it that they're not around enough? Well, no. Some characters are only meant to show up for a brief period and then disappear. The biggest thing you can do to mess up a character is make them boring. Okay? And when I say boring, I mean flawless. This is one of the reasons I don't like Superman. Because to me, Superman is too perfect. He can't do anything wrong. He can take a bullet to the face. He can fly he can fly faster than a speeding bullet. He can stop a train. No, I take that back. He doesn't just stop trains, he stops comets. In fact, the superhero website, the Superman website states that Superman is as strong as he needs to be. That's not interesting. I want to see a character like Batman who actually has to struggle, who has to use his mind, his brains, his training to come down to what he needs to do. That's an interesting character. True interesting characters are characters who can overcome their flaws, overcome their difficulties, overcome their shortcomings. And in doing so, make us more interested in them. So the first element is to make them well-rounded. So ask yourself, what flaws does my character have? And when you're thinking about flaws, here's the best way to do it. First, I want you to pretend like you're introducing yourself to somebody. Say, hello, my name is Cliff. I'll use myself as the example. My name is Cliff. I'm a martial artist. I like to compete. I'm a hiker. I love to go on hiking trips. I love to swim. I love writing and reading. I want to be a teacher one day. I've worked several different jobs, done well in all of them. Now, notice as I'm going, am I saying anything negative about myself? No, I'm not. Of course I'm not. Because I'm talking to you. I don't want you to know all the negative attributes to me. That's not a good first impression. But in real life, I do have flaws. So when introducing yourself to somebody, think about the flaws you're not telling and consider the flaws your character might possess. So after you finish coming up with a name and a gender and an age and all that, think about those flaws. Think about the things that they may have coming up short. Think about their positives, but also consider their negatives. Both aspects are important. Okay, that's the first. Number 2, personality. Personality is incredibly important, okay? When talking about a personality of a character, it's not just a matter of what they look like. Like, for example, if you were to say, oh, he's handsome, that's not a personality trait. That's a physical aspect. Physical aspects are important, but they come last. They're the last thing we worry about. Let's talk about personality first. Personality traits would be things like they're easily angry, they're tenacious, they're funny, they're bombastic. These are personality traits because they describe how they act. The best way to determine their personality is to do what I call a character interview. Ask your character a series of questions. So what I could do here is hand out to you a bunch of papers with a series of questions to ask your character, like, where did your character go to school? What was his favorite subject? What did he like about that subject? What was his family life like? Does he have any brothers and sisters that he competes with? Is he a competitive person? You know, these are some questions you can ask that can help you get a better idea of the personality of your character. When you have a character personality, you can better understand who the character is and what shapes them in the world that they're in. And don't think that a personality has to necessarily stay the same over the course of the story. A good character is dynamic. A good character changes over time. So while they may be very lazy and layabout at the beginning, maybe near the end, they're more proactive. So consider that. Number 3, background information. Now you might think, well, hold on, background information, isn't that like backstory? Like things that we should already know about our character? A lot of people forget that a background information is vital to developing everything else about a character. For example, if we were to say that the personality of our character is easily angered, why is that? What background did he have that led him to be this way? Or was he born that way? What aspects of us make us the way we are? So think about this. Think about this in your mind. Why do you act the way you act? If you pray around the dinner table before you eat, why do you do that? If your goal is to be a doctor one day, why do you want to be a doctor? What put that in your mind? A lot of these kind of questions are answered in the backstory of your character. Why does your character want to do what he does? Backstory. Why does your character act the way he does today? Backstory. Who is your character's mother, father, brother, sister, uncle, nephews, aunts, cousins, roommate? Backstory. It is one of the most important aspects of your character. And this is probably going to be the longest part of creating your character because there's a lot that can go into it. For example, in the story Journey to the West, which is one of my favorite books of all time, the book is actually about a guy named Xuanzang. But for the first 7 chapters of Journey to the West, Xuanzang never shows up. In fact, it tells the backstory of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. The first 7 chapters are totally dedicated to it because you need to know where Sun Wukong came from in order for you to have the context of what happens later in the story. All of this is important. The backstory helps set up the roots for the world. Without the backstory, you got nothing. A character doesn't just plop out of nowhere. Even Moses had a backstory. All right, so that's that. Number 4, interests, hobbies, things that they like to do, things that they do. Sorry. What is it about the character that makes them unique and dynamic? What is their action? Maybe they play video games all day. If they're a lazy person, that's a good connection. They're lazy and they play video games all day. You could even make the argument that's a negative trait. Remember we talked about negative traits, well-rounded. So negativity. You could also say that maybe they like to play soccer and their personality is competitive. You're starting to see how the personality and the interests can play into each other. And also think about the ways that the backstory can play into it. So back to the soccer one. Maybe the character's father was a star soccer player, so now your character wants to play soccer like their father. So they're always proactive in training and active outside, and their hobby is soccer. Starting to see some similarities here, starting to see some connections. These are all the different aspects that make up a character. And again, a good way to do this is to do character interviews, to talk things out with your character. Pretend your character's in front of you, and you're asking them these questions. How would they answer? Consider not only how they answer, but the tone in which they answer. Consider the way they would act being asked these questions. For example, maybe you ask a character, what's your favorite thing to do in your spare time? If they snort and go, well, obviously, I like to, then you can assume they're snobbish. And if the response is, well, obviously, I like to read books, they're well read, kind of snobbish about being well read, but well read. See what I mean? You're starting to get a better feel for the character. They're not just a name on a paper, they're not just a title in a book. They're a 3-dimensional character that we can relate to. And that's the most important quality. Okay, you know what? If you don't learn anything else from this little video, if you learn nothing else from this, put this in bold, highlight it. The key to good main character especially, but the key to good character is relatability, or at least emotional connection. You see, a main character is someone As a rule, there are exceptions, but rarely, there are exceptions. A main character is someone we connect to. We want to see them succeed. We want to see what happens to them. Why? Because we connect their problems with our own. We connect their wonder with our own. When Harry Potter discovers Hogwarts and that he's a wizard for the first time, how many of you went back to your childhood where you wished you could be a part of a magical school where you learn wizardry and magic and all that? How many of you jumped back to your inner child when you read that? Of course you did. You connected to Harry there. Harry was in an abusive family with abusive aunt and uncle, a cruel bullying cousin, and all of a sudden here comes this guy saying, "Hey, by the way, did you know you're a wizard?" Wow, that's awesome. I'm a wizard. You get excited about it. And of course you would, because you connect to Harry. Harry's joy is your joy. Harry's fears are your fears. You connect to the character. Now, this isn't true of all characters, mind you. There are some characters we're not meant to relate to, we're meant to fear. This is called emotional connection. And this goes along quite often with a villain. So if you're creating a villain, you need to establish why we emotionally fear them. For example, let's use the example of, what's a good villain? You know what? Since we were on Harry Potter, let's do Voldemort. Why do we hate Voldemort? Do we relate to the guy? Not really, especially not at first. Maybe later in the book series we start to, but at first, no, we don't relate to him. He's just a villain. But what makes him scary? Well, for one thing, the fact that no one wants to say his name. Think about that. No one wants to say his name. Isn't that kind of scary? Like, this guy is so evil and dangerous that you can't even say who he is. You can't even say his name. That's kind of creepy, isn't it? So consider that. Sometimes it's not about the relatability, but the emotional connection. Think about that when you're creating your character. What's relatable about them? How can an audience member connect to them? So, the best way to do that, when thinking of your character, when reading it, what do you want to see your character go through? Think about the next step in the phase. What struggles do you want to see your character face? What's their goal? And that's our next point. The next point, the next element of a character, goal. Motivation. The term is motivation. What are they trying to reach? See how I tied all that all in there? Yeah, I tied that in pretty well, like a shoelace. So, what's their motivation? And the motivation is the last point here that I make in the elements of a character, because every other piece should lead to it. The backstory should connect to the personality, that connects to the interest, that connects to the motive. Let's go back to Harry Potter. Harry, what's his motivation? Let's not talk about all of his different motivations. A character can have multiple motivations, but to help keep it simple, let's focus on the first one. He wants to defeat Voldemort. Simple enough. He wants to defeat Voldemort. Okay. That's his motivation. Why? Well, let's go back to backstory. Voldemort killed his parents. Left him with those nasty aunt and uncle, remember? Yeah. Killed his family. Leads to motivation. That's the backstory. Let's go to personality. Harry is a believer in justice. He has a strong sense of justice, a very strong moral compass. Evil is bad, righteous is good. He should do the right thing. If Voldemort's trying to steal the Sorcerer's Stone, well, it's my responsibility and my job to stop him, isn't it? Personality plays into the game, so personality leads to it. Interest. What are his interests? Well, he's studying wizardry. He has the tools now to stop Voldemort. He's not a baby anymore. He's studying wizardry. He understands Quidditch. He spends time with Hagrid. By spending time with Hagrid, he learns secrets about how to get to the Sorcerer's Stone. By playing Quidditch, he increases his connections to the school and to other students, so he builds friendships and connections. Through Ron and Hermione's friendship, he manages to overcome some of the challenges that he faces. In fact, you could argue that Ron's interest in chess helps him get through one of the challenges. Starting to see how these different elements connect into that motivation, this motivation is going to be paramount. But beware, because motivation is tricky. A lot of people want to put motivation in and mix it with the plot. Now, don't get me wrong. Motivation is the end result of the plot. Motivation is what your character wants to achieve by the end or halfway through. But sometimes people will mix in motivation with the plot. Now, think about it like this, for example. Let's say that you're writing out a character sheet, and I ask you to write out every element for me about Harry Potter. When you get into motivation, you might write out, Harry Potter wants to defeat Lord Voldemort because Lord Voldemort killed his parents, and Harry goes to school to learn how to defeat Lord Voldemort, and he goes to play Quidditch, and stop. Leave out Quidditch. Leave out going to Hogwarts. Leave that out for now. That's not his motivation. Those are the stepping stones to achieve motivation. Motivation is what he's aiming to get. And if you lose yourself in trying to get through the steps, you do what I like to call a building block story. And what I mean by that is this. When you start to build a foundation for your story, you may start to build too fast. So for example, if you start saying from the start from motivation that in order to defeat Lord Voldemort, he goes to wizarding school, he joins a Quidditch team, he makes friends with Ron and Hermione, he goes in and defeats him. What have you done? You have left out a great deal of detail and thrown in a few plot holes. Like for example, what spells has he learned to defeat him? What benefit does the Quidditch team have to him defeating Lord Voldemort? How did Ron and Hermione help him? How did any of his friends help him? How did any of this help him defeat Lord Voldemort? So now you have to fill in those blocks. Don't worry about it right now. We're not worried about that. We're worried about the character. We can worry about plot in another lesson. But for this lesson, we're worried about character. So focus on the motivation. The motivation for Harry Potter would be he wants to defeat Lord Voldemort. That's his motivation. That's his end goal. That's what he wants to do. Bam, done. Now, consider that the motivation to defeat Lord Voldemort was not his first motivation. His first motivation was probably just to get through wizarding school. Motivation has tendency to change. If the character's interest, remember that element, the character's interests, personality, or any of these other elements change. When these other elements change, the motivation changes. And I'll give you another example. How many of you have read Harry Potter number 3, The Prisoner of Azkaban? Remember how at the very beginning, when Sirius Black, who turned out to be Harry Potter's godfather in the end, when it turned out that Harry learned that Sirius was after him, at first, Ron's dad is all like, no, don't go after Sirius. And Harry asks the question, why would I do that? He's trying to kill me. I don't want to go after him. His motivation at that point is just to get through school until he learns that Sirius Black had a hand in leading to his parents' deaths. Suddenly, that new knowledge about his backstory has had an impact on his motivation. He now wants to kill Black. Until, yet again, another change, we learn it wasn't Black who betrayed his family, it was Peter Pettigrew, a character we haven't even heard of before. So now, a new change to the backstory has once again altered his motivation. See how difficult creating a character can be? I told you at the beginning, it's not as simple as writing down a name, a gender, and an age and tossing them into a story. It is never that simple. But if you follow these 5 steps, you should be able to create a pretty cool character. So for the activity that I would propose, start by writing out a name for your character, an age, a race, and a gender. Then write out your 5 elements: backstory, personality, interests, motivation, and then at the very bottom I want you to write well-rounded. And I want you to leave well-rounded down there just as a reminder. You don't need to fill it in. Just remind yourself, is your character showing flaws? Is your character showing weaknesses? Don't make them a Mary Sue. That's the thing you need to avoid. Don't fill anything there. Just write it as a reminder. So as you're writing this and you're saying, my character came from a cool home of awesome people where, check, is he well-rounded? That's not a well-rounded character. Think about how coming from that home might affect him. See what I mean? And this is what it takes to create a great character. And over time, I'll display some awesome character interview questions for you to build up the character. We can write out a few short stories about the character, about how they got started, where they're going. These things help establish character. I hope that this has been a fun lesson for you guys. I hope that y'all have learned a lot from it. Take care.